As the village midwife held up the tiny infant, her eyes widened in shock. The child was smaller than any she had ever seen, with stubby limbs and an oversized head. In that moment, nobody knew that this little girl would one day change everything they believed about strength, courage, and what it truly means to be beautiful. The baby's mother, Asha, named her Zola, which means quiet and tranquil. It was a name that seemed to fit the tiny child, who rarely cried and looked at the world with big, curious eyes. But while Asha and her husband Kito saw only love when they gazed at their daughter, the rest of the village saw something very different. As Zola grew, it became clear that she was not like other children. Her arms and legs remained short, and her head seemed too big for her body. The village elders whispered that she must be cursed, that her presence would bring bad luck to them all. Children pointed and laughed when Zola tried to play with them, calling her cruel names and pushing her away. Asha and Kito did their best to protect their daughter, but they couldn't shield her from the whole world. Zola learned to walk later than other children, her little legs struggling to carry her. When she finally took her first steps at the age of 3, instead of celebration, there were only whispers and stares from the villagers. Zola was not allowed to go to the village school. The teacher said she would be too much of a distraction for the other children. But Zola was smart and curious. She would sit outside the school hut, listening to the lessons through the walls made of mud and straw. At night, she would ask her parents endless questions about what she had heard. As Zola grew older, the other children's taunts became meaner. They would chant, "Zola the tiny, Zola the strange, go back to the forest where you belong." Zola tried to be brave, but sometimes she would hide behind her family's hut and cry, wishing she could be like everyone else. But Zola had a secret. While the other children played and went to school, she watched her father, Kito, as he worked. Kito was the village's best basket weaver, and his baskets were famous in all the surrounding villages. Zola loved to watch his fingers move quickly, weaving the grasses and reeds into beautiful patterns. One day, when Zola was 8 years old, she asked her father if she could try making a basket. Kito was worried that the sharp reeds might hurt her small hands, but Zola begged until he agreed. To everyone's surprise, Zola's small fingers were perfect for the delicate work of basket weaving. Within a few weeks, she was making baskets even more beautiful than her father's. Word of Zola's skill spread quickly. People from other villages started coming to buy her baskets. They were amazed that such beautiful work could come from someone so small. Slowly, the way people looked at Zola began to change. They still stared, but now it was with wonder instead of disgust. As Zola got older, she faced new challenges. While other girls her age started to talk about marriage and having families of their own, Zola knew that many people thought she would never find love. This made her sad, but she tried not to let it show. Instead, she focused on her basket weaving, creating more and more beautiful designs. One day, a young man named Tao came to the village. He was a trader from a far-off city, and he had heard about Zola's amazing baskets. When he met Zola, he didn't stare or look away like most strangers did. Instead, he smiled and told her how much he admired her work. Tao started visiting the village more often, always making time to talk with Zola. He made her laugh with stories of his travels and listened with interest to her ideas for new basket designs. Zola found herself looking forward to his visits more and more. The villagers were shocked when Tao asked Zola's parents for permission to marry her. Many people said it wouldn't last, that Tao would eventually get tired of having such an unusual wife. But Zola and Tao didn't care what anyone else thought. They knew they had found something special in each other. Their wedding day was unlike any the village had ever seen. People came from far and wide to see the famous basket weaver marry her handsome trader. As Zola walked through the village, dressed in her best clothes and wearing a crown of flowers, the same children who had once teased her now threw petals at her feet. After the wedding, Zola and Tao worked together. Zola continued to make her beautiful baskets, and Tao sold them in markets across the country. Their home became known as a place of warmth and laughter, where everyone was welcome regardless of how they looked. Years passed, and Zola and Tao were blessed with 2 children of their own. Their daughter, Nia, and son, Jabari, were both born healthy and of normal height. Zola made sure to teach them that true beauty comes from a person's heart, not from how they look on the outside. As Zola grew older, she became one of the most respected people in the village. The same elders who had once called her cursed now came to her for advice. Young mothers brought their children to her, asking for her blessing. Even the teacher who had refused to let her attend school asked Zola to teach the children about basket weaving. One day, when Zola was an old woman with gray hair and wrinkles on her face, a group of children came to her, asking for a story. Zola smiled and began to tell them about a little girl who was born different, who faced cruelty and hardship, but who never gave up. As she spoke, the children listened with wide eyes, learning important lessons about kindness, perseverance, and the true meaning of beauty. Zola's story spread far beyond her village. People would come from distant lands to meet the famous basket weaver who had changed so many hearts. And though Zola remained small in stature, everyone who met her could see that her spirit was as tall as the mighty baobab trees that dotted the African landscape. In her final years, Zola could often be found sitting under a large acacia tree, weaving baskets and telling stories to the village children. She would look out at the village she had grown up in, remembering how much had changed. The place that had once shunned her now celebrated her, and the people who had once looked down on her now looked up to her as a source of wisdom and inspiration. When Zola finally passed away, the entire village mourned. But they also celebrated her life and the lessons she had taught them. They realized that Zola had given them a precious gift. She had shown them that true strength doesn't come from physical size, but from the size of one's heart. Years after Zola's death, visitors to the village would still hear her story. They would see her baskets displayed proudly in every home, and they would hear her name spoken with reverence and love. And in the center of the village, where children played and elders gathered to talk, stood a statue. It was small, just like Zola had been, but it cast a long shadow. On the base of the statue were written these words: Zola, small in size, giant in spirit. She taught us to see with our hearts. And so, the legacy of Zola, the girl who was born a dwarf but grew to be a giant in the eyes of her people, lived on. Her story continued to inspire generation after generation, reminding all who heard it that true beauty and worth come from within, and that even the smallest person can make the biggest difference in the world. Many years after Zola's passing, her village had grown into a bustling town. People from all over the country came to learn the art of basket weaving that Zola had made famous. The town was known for its acceptance and kindness towards all people, regardless of their appearance or abilities. In this town lived a young girl named Amara. She was Zola's great-granddaughter, born with the same condition that had made Zola different. Like her great-grandmother, Amara was a dwarf. But unlike Zola's time, Amara was welcomed and loved by everyone in the town from the day she was born. Amara grew up hearing stories about her great-grandmother. She would sit for hours under the statue of Zola in the town center, imagining what life must have been like for her ancestor. Amara was proud of her family history, but she also felt a heavy weight on her small shoulders. Everyone expected her to be just like Zola, wise, talented, and able to change the world. As Amara got older, she realized that she didn't share Zola's talent for basket weaving. Her fingers were clumsy with the reeds, and her patterns always came out crooked. This made Amara feel like she was letting everyone down. How could she live up to Zola's legacy if she couldn't even weave a simple basket? One day, when Amara was feeling particularly sad about her lack of weaving skills, she wandered to the edge of town. There, she found an old man sitting by a small pond. His name was Jabari, and he was Zola's son, Amara's grandfather. Jabari noticed Amara's sadness and asked her what was wrong. Amara poured out all her worries, how she felt she was disappointing everyone because she couldn't weave baskets like Zola, how she feared she would never be as important or respected as her great-grandmother. Jabari listened patiently, then he smiled and said, "Amara, do you know why your great-grandmother Zola was truly special?" Amara shook her head, expecting to hear about Zola's basket weaving skills. "It wasn't because of her baskets," Jabari said. "It was because she had the courage to be herself in a world that told her she wasn't good enough. She found her own path, even when everyone told her she couldn't." These words made Amara think. She realized that by trying so hard to be like Zola, she hadn't been true to herself. She thanked her grandfather and went home with a new determination. Over the next few weeks, Amara tried many different activities. She tried cooking but burned more meals than she made edible. She tried singing, but her voice was more suited to scaring away birds than entertaining people. But then, she picked up a piece of charcoal and started to draw. To her surprise, Amara found that she loved drawing. She would spend hours sketching the people and places around her. Her drawings weren't perfect, but they captured the spirit of her subjects in a way that made people smile. At first, some people in the town were disappointed that Amara wasn't following in Zola's footsteps as a basket weaver. But as they saw the joy that drawing brought to Amara, and the beautiful art she created, they began to understand. Amara was honoring Zola's legacy not by copying her, but by having the courage to be herself. As Amara's skill grew, people began to commission her to draw portraits and scenes from the town. Her artwork became as famous as Zola's baskets had once been. People would come from far and wide to see the young dwarf girl who could capture the soul of a person in a simple charcoal sketch. But Amara didn't stop at drawing. She started to teach other children how to draw, including those who were different in some way. Children who were too tall, too short, or who had trouble walking or seeing. She showed them that everyone has a unique way of seeing the world, and that this uniqueness is what makes art special. One day, a group of people from a nearby village came to the town. They had heard about Amara and wanted to see her drawings. Among them was a young boy who was blind. When he heard about Amara's drawings, he became sad, thinking he would never be able to enjoy them. Amara thought for a moment, then had an idea. She took some thick paper and drew on it with a special pen that left raised lines. Then she guided the boy's hand over the drawing. His face lit up as he felt the lines and curves, seeing the drawing through his fingers. From that day on, Amara started creating art that could be enjoyed by people who couldn't see. She made raised line drawings, sculptures that told stories through touch, and even found a way to add sense to her artwork to create full sensory experiences. As Amara grew older, she became known not just for her art, but for her kindness and her ability to see the beauty in everyone. People would come from all over to learn from her, not just about art but about life and acceptance. One evening, as Amara sat under the statue of Zola, a young girl approached her. The girl was nervous and shuffling her feet. "Miss Amara," she said, "I'm not good at drawing or weaving or anything really. How can I ever be special like you or your great-grandmother?" Amara smiled gently at the girl. "Being special isn't about being good at something that other people think is important," she said. "It's about finding what makes your heart sing and having the courage to share that with the world." Zola did that with her baskets. I do it with my drawings. You'll find your own way, and that's what will make you special. As the sun set over the town, casting long shadows from Zola's statue, Amara realized that she had indeed lived up to her great-grandmother's legacy, not by being exactly like Zola, but by embodying the spirit of courage, kindness, and self-acceptance that Zola had taught their people so many years ago. And so, the legacy of Zola lived on, not just in baskets and drawings, but in the hearts of all those who learn to see the world through eyes of acceptance and love. The little town continued to grow and flourish, becoming a beacon of hope and acceptance in a world that too often judged people by their appearance. And at the heart of it all was the story of a small woman with a giant spirit, and the great-granddaughter who had the courage to follow her own path. As the years passed, the town that Zola and Amara had shaped continued to grow and evolve. It had become a haven for people from all walks of life, especially those who felt different or out of place elsewhere. The town, now known as Utulivu, which means harmony in Swahili, had become famous across the continent for its atmosphere of acceptance and creativity. At the heart of Utulivu stood a grand building, the Zola Center for Arts and Inclusion. It was here that Amara, now in her 60s, spent most of her days. Her hair had turned gray, and wrinkles lined her face, but her eyes still sparkled with creativity and kindness. The center was a bustling hub of activity, filled with art studios, classrooms, and galleries showcasing works from artists of all abilities. One sunny morning, as Amara was preparing for her day, a young woman named Zuri entered her office. Zuri was tall and slender, with vitiligo that created patches of light skin across her dark complexion. She had come to Utulivu seeking refuge from a world that had often been cruel to her because of her appearance. "Miss Amara," Zuri said hesitantly, "I've heard so much about you and this place. I was hoping you might have a job for me. I don't have any special talents, but I'm willing to work hard." Amara looked at Zuri thoughtfully. "Tell me, Zuri, what brings you joy? What makes your heart feel light?" Zuri hesitated, then spoke softly. "I love stories. Reading them, hearing them, imagining them. But that's not really a useful skill, is it?" Amara's face broke into a wide smile. "Oh, Zuri," she said, "stories are the very foundation of who we are. They have the power to change hearts and minds. I think we might have the perfect place for you here." And so, Zuri began working at the Zola Center as a storyteller. She started small, reading to groups of children in the center's library. But soon, word spread of the captivating young woman whose stories could transport listeners to other worlds. As Zuri's confidence grew, so did her ambitions. She approached Amara with an idea. "What if we could share our stories with people beyond Utulivu? What if we could teach others about acceptance and inclusion through the power of storytelling?" Amara was thrilled with the idea. Together, they developed a program called Stories of Utulivu. They recruited a diverse group of storytellers, people of all shapes, sizes, colors, and abilities, and began creating a collection of tales that celebrated differences and promoted understanding. One of these storytellers was a man named Jabari, named after Zola's son. Jabari had been born with no arms, but he had learned to paint beautiful landscapes using his feet. His story of perseverance and adaptation became one of the most popular in their collection. Another storyteller was a young boy named Kito, who was on the autism spectrum. Akito had a unique way of seeing the world, and his stories were filled with vivid details that others might overlook. His tale of a day in Utulivu, seen through his eyes, helped many people understand and appreciate neurodiversity. As the Stories of Utulivu program grew, Amara and Zuri decided to take it on the road. They organized a traveling storytelling festival that would visit towns and villages across the country. The festival included not just storytelling, but also art exhibitions, music performances, and workshops, all centered around the themes of inclusion and celebrating diversity. The first stop on their tour was a small village called Mwamba. The villagers there were initially wary of the strange group of performers and artists who had come to their home. But as the stories unfolded and the art was shared, the villagers began to open their hearts and minds. One evening, as Zuri was telling the story of Zola to a group of villagers, an old man stood up. Tears were streaming down his face. "I knew Zola," he said. "I was one of the children who used to tease her when we were young. I've carried the shame of that my whole life." Hearing her story now, understanding what she went through and what she achieved, it's given me a chance to finally forgive myself and honor her memory. This moment became a turning point for the festival. News of the transformative power of the Stories of Utulivu spread, and soon villages and towns were requesting visits from the traveling festival. Back in Utulivu, Amara worked tirelessly to expand the Zola Center's programs. She started an Artist-in-Residence program, inviting artists with disabilities from around the world to come and share their skills. One of these artists was a deaf painter named Nia, who taught art classes using sign language, introducing the community to a new form of communication. As the center grew, so did its impact. Universities began sending students to Utulivu to study its unique approach to community building and inclusion. Governments sent representatives to learn how they could implement similar programs in their own countries. But with growth came challenges. As Utulivu became more well-known, it started attracting attention from people who didn't share its values. Some saw the town as a novelty, a place to gawk at people who were different. Others sought to exploit the town's reputation for their own gain. Amara and the town council had to work hard to protect Utulivu's spirit, while still remaining open and welcoming. They implemented education programs for visitors, teaching them about respect and appropriate behavior. They also established strict guidelines for researchers and media, ensuring that the dignity of Utulivu's residents was always protected. One day, a large corporation approached the town with an offer. They wanted to build a resort in Utulivu, promising jobs and economic growth. But their plan would have required tearing down part of the old town, including the original statue of Zola. The town was divided. Some saw the opportunity for economic advancement, while others feared losing the soul of their community. Amara called for a town meeting to discuss the issue. The meeting lasted long into the night. People from all walks of life spoke, sharing their fears, hopes, and ideas. As the discussion went on, something remarkable happened. People who disagreed began to truly listen to each other, seeking to understand rather than to argue. In the end, the town came up with a compromise. They would allow the resort to be built, but on the outskirts of town. The corporation would have to commit to hiring locally, including people with disabilities, and to incorporating the principles of universal design in their construction. Additionally, a portion of the resort's profits would go towards funding the Zola Center and other community programs. This decision marked a new chapter for Utulivu. It showed that the town could grow and change while still holding true to its core values. The spirit of Zola, of finding strength in difference and beauty in diversity, continued to guide the community. As Amara watched these changes unfold, she felt a deep sense of pride and hope. She thought back to her great-grandmother Zola, and how she had started all of this simply by refusing to be limited by others' perceptions of her. One evening, as the sun was setting, Amara made her way to the old statue of Zola in the town square. She sat down at its base, feeling the cool stone against her back. A group of children were playing nearby, a beautiful mix of abilities and appearances, all laughing and enjoying each other's company without a second thought to their differences. As she watched them, Amara felt a presence beside her. She turned to see Zuri sitting down next to her. "It's amazing, isn't it?" Zuri said, gesturing to the children. "To think, all of this started with one small woman who refused to be defined by her size." Amara nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. Zola used to say that our differences are not something to overcome, but something to embrace. That true strength comes from accepting ourselves and each other, just as we are. Zuri smiled, taking Amara's hand in hers. "And look at what that idea has grown into. A whole town, a movement even. Zola's legacy lives on in every person who finds acceptance here, in every story we tell, in every piece of art we create." As they sat there, watching the sun sink below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple, Amara felt a sense of peace wash over her. She knew that whatever challenges the future might bring, the spirit of Utulivu, the spirit of Zola, would endure. And so, as night fell on the town that had grown from one small woman's courage, the legacy of Zola continued to spread, touching hearts and changing minds, one story, one piece of art, one act of kindness at a time. In Utulivu and beyond, people were learning to see with their hearts, to find strength in their differences, and to create a world where everyone, regardless of their appearance or abilities, could find a place to belong.